Before this story goes any further, if dark truths, hidden systems, and real human consequences pull you in, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with us. Because once you enter this place, silence is the loudest weapon. The sirens cut through the Colorado night like a blade. They echoed off empty highways, bounced against the flat darkness of the plains, and died quietly as the convoy slowed. No flashing city lights, no crowds, just a stretch of land so barren it felt deliberately forgotten. At exactly 2:17 a.m., three unmarked armored vehicles rolled to a stop outside a concrete complex that didn't announce its name. It didn't need to. ADX Florence, the final destination for men the system no longer trusted to exist anywhere else. Inside the lead vehicle sat a man who had once controlled hundreds of others without raising his voice. His wrists were cuffed, his ankles chained. A black hood covered his face, but it didn't matter. Everyone in that convoy knew exactly who he was. What mattered was what this place was about to do to him. As the doors opened, the air felt heavier, colder, not because of the temperature, but because of the rules. Every movement was calculated, every step rehearsed. Guards didn't shout, they didn't rush. They moved with the quiet certainty of people who had learned that sound itself could be a liability. This wasn't just a prison transfer. This was the moment a mind entered a system designed to test its limits. Less than 48 hours earlier, that same man had been the subject of a nationwide manhunt. A routine transport had gone wrong, a vehicle disabled, a guard injured. For 12 hours, law enforcement believed he had vanished into the open world. Panic spread quickly through command centers, media outlets, and private offices that preferred to stay unnamed. When he was finally found, hiding in a drainage tunnel just outside Pueblo, he didn't resist. He smiled. That smile was why he was here now. ADX Florence was built for inmates who didn't just break rules. It was built for those who bent people, those whose influence survived walls, wire, and distance, those who could order violence with a look, start riots with a whisper, and destabilize entire institutions from a standard cell. This place was designed to remove one thing completely: connection. Warden Eleanor Voss stood behind the reinforced glass, watching the intake through a live feed. She had seen this moment hundreds of times, but she never treated it as routine. That was a mistake others made. Voss was a veteran of 3 federal supermax facilities. She understood that ADX wasn't about punishment in the traditional sense. It was about containment of the mind. And tonight's arrival concerned her more than she cared to admit. The inmate's file sat open on her desk. Thick, red-tagged, psychological evaluations flagged in bold. Patterns circled again and again by analysts who all reached the same conclusion using different language. Unusual resistance to isolation. That was rare. Most inmates feared silence before they ever experienced it. Some cracked within weeks. Others adapted by breaking themselves into pieces they could manage. But a few, very few, seemed to grow sharper in solitude. Those were the ones that kept administrators awake at night. Dr. Samuel Reyes knew that better than anyone. Reyes was ADX Florence's lead forensic psychologist, brought in after a series of unexplained incidents years earlier, episodes that never made the news, never appeared in reports, and were discussed only behind closed doors. He had spent his career studying criminal cognition, but ADX changed him. It forced him to ask questions his textbooks never prepared him for. Can isolation reform a mind? Or does it simply reveal what was always there? As the inmate was escorted down a corridor, so clean it felt surgical, Reyes watched from a separate monitor. The man's posture was relaxed, almost curious. He turned his head slightly, as if listening, not to the guards, but to the building itself. That detail made Reyes uneasy. The cell door closed with a sound that wasn't loud, but absolute. A mechanical finality that told the nervous system something irreversible had just occurred. Inside the cell, there was no mirror. No sharp edges, no shadows deep enough to hide in. A concrete bed, a steel desk, a narrow slit of reinforced glass facing a wall. 23 hours a day would be spent right there. No human contact, no shouted conversations, no spontaneous noise. Meals delivered through a slot without eye contact. Exercise alone in a concrete pen with walls too high to see the sky clearly. Silence wasn't a side effect here. It was policy. Within the first hour, sensors embedded in the cell began tracking everything: movement patterns, breathing rhythms, sleep cycles. Algorithms compared the data to thousands of others who had passed through the same system. The results were immediate. "This doesn't make sense," a technician muttered, staring at the screen. The inmate wasn't pacing. He wasn't restless. His heart rate was steady, his movements deliberate. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, eyes open, waiting. By morning, rumors began moving through the staff in whispers that felt illegal in a place like this. An overnight guard claimed the inmate had been humming softly. Another said he stood perfectly still for over an hour without shifting his weight. Reyes dismissed the speculation publicly. Privately, he reviewed the footage himself. At 3:41 a.m., the inmate leaned toward the door and whispered something so quietly the microphones barely caught it. Reyes enhanced the audio. "I can hear you thinking." The words weren't threatening. They were confident. That same morning, Warden Voss was called into an emergency briefing. A sealed envelope sat on the table, delivered before dawn. Inside was a memo marked internal, eyes only. It referenced 3 prior cases. 3 inmates who had entered ADX Florence with similar psychological profiles. All 3 had been transferred out within 2 years under circumstances that were never fully documented. One had suffered a complete cognitive collapse. One had attempted to manipulate staff through indirect behavioral cues so subtle they weren't noticed until too late. The third had left behind something that no one could explain. A pattern. Voss looked up from the memo, her expression unreadable. "We're not repeating history," she said firmly. "Not here." But history had a way of resurfacing in places built to bury it. Later that evening, during a routine systems check, a junior analyst noticed an anomaly. The inmate's sensor data showed synchronized spikes that didn't align with any known stress response. It was as if his body was reacting to something that wasn't happening, or something no one else could detect. When Reyes reviewed the findings, his stomach tightened. "Get me the archived files," he said quietly. "All of them." As night fell over ADX Florence, the facility returned to its usual state, orderly, controlled, silent. But in cell D17, the inmate lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind working through something unseen. And deep within the system, buried under layers of protocols and safeguards, an old question resurfaced with dangerous clarity. What happens when a prison built to break the mind meets one that refuses to bend? Because when they opened the restricted archive later that night, one file was missing, and that was when they realized this wasn't just another inmate. It was a test, and ADX Florence might be the one under examination. The effects by the 10th day, ADX Florence noticed the silence was no longer behaving the way it was supposed to. Silence, inside the facility, had patterns. It slowed men down. It flattened emotions. It stripped bravado into something manageable. Dr. Samuel Reyes had watched it happen dozens of times. High-ranking gang leaders reduced to counting footsteps, former terrorists whispering to themselves just to hear a human sound. But cell D17 was different. The inmate hadn't spoken again since that first night. No humming, no muttering, no breakdown. His routine was precise to the second. Wake, sit, stand, pace exactly 8 steps. Stop, breathe, repeat. Not coping, calibrating. Reyes brought the data to Warden Voss during a closed-door meeting. No assistants, no recordings. "He's adapting faster than our models predicted," Reyes said. "Not emotionally, cognitively." Voss didn't look surprised. She had spent years learning to recognize threats that didn't announce themselves. "Define adapting." "He's using the isolation," Reyes replied. "Most inmates fight it or collapse under it. He's mapping it." That word lingered. Mapping. ADX Florence was a machine built on repetition. Lights at the same hour. Meals at the same intervals. Guards rotated with algorithmic precision. Silence enforced not just acoustically, but psychologically. Over time, inmates lost the ability to anticipate change. This inmate was doing the opposite. 3 weeks in, guards reported subtle issues. Nothing that triggered alarms. Nothing reportable under standard protocol. Just feelings. One officer claimed he felt watched while passing D17, even though the inmate never approached the door. Another said his radio cut out briefly every time he stopped near that cell. Technicians found no fault. The systems were perfect. They always were. Then the first real incident happened. During a routine medical check, non-contact, conducted through reinforced glass, the inmate spoke. Not loudly. Not urgently. "You're early today," he said. The nurse froze. According to protocol, Inmates weren't informed of schedules. They couldn't see clocks. The lighting inside the cells was intentionally ambiguous. Reyes reviewed the footage himself. "How did you know?" the nurse asked, her voice betraying the smallest tremor. The inmate smiled. "You breathed differently on Thursdays." The session ended immediately. That afternoon, Reyes updated the file with a note he never thought he'd write in a federal supermax evaluation. Subject demonstrates heightened perceptual acuity under extreme isolation. The phrase circulated quietly among senior staff. Some dismissed it as academic overreach. Others remembered the memo, the missing files, the pattern. At night, Reyes began dreaming about the facility. Long corridors stretching endlessly, doors opening without sound, inmates standing motionless, listening. He told himself it was stress. Then came the self-harm report. In cell C-09, an inmate who had been stable for over a year was found unresponsive. No visible injuries. No signs of struggle. Just catatonia. Eyes open. Pulse shallow. The only unusual detail? Moments before the incident, the inmate had requested a grievance form and written a single sentence. "He's teaching us how to hear it." The man was transferred out within hours. Officially, the incident was unrelated. Unofficially, Reyes began comparing timelines. Every anomaly, every report, every unexplained behavioral shift among inmates in adjacent cells. The pattern emerged slowly, like an image developing in chemical bath. Proximity, not physical, psychological. The inmate in D-17 wasn't communicating in any conventional way. No shouting, no notes, no contact, but something about his presence was influencing the environment. Isolation doesn't just remove noise, Reyes explained during another private briefing. It amplifies perception. When sound disappears, the mind starts listening inward. Voss folded her arms. "You're suggesting he's affecting other inmates without contact. I'm suggesting he understands something about silence that we don't." The warden stared at the live feed monitor mounted on her wall. The inmate sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, perfectly still. "He's not the first to test this place," she said quietly. "But he might be the first to push back." 2 days later, a systems audit flagged irregularities in the audio dampening network along D block. Not malfunctions, adjustments. As if the environment itself was subtly compensating. Engineers recalibrated the system, increased suppression, tightened parameters. The inmate's behavior changed immediately. He began standing at the center of the cell for hours at a time, head tilted slightly, listening. Then he spoke again, this time during a guard rotation. "You adjusted the walls," he said calmly. The guard didn't respond. He wasn't allowed to. "You shouldn't have done that." The words weren't angry. They were instructional. That night, Reyes stayed late, reviewing archived case files from the 3 prior inmates flagged in the memo. One detail stood out across all of them. Extended exposure to total sensory deprivation had not weakened their cognitive frameworks. It had reorganized them. One case described an inmate who could predict guard rotations with near-perfect accuracy. Another detailed a man who developed what evaluators described as anticipatory awareness, a heightened sensitivity to environmental microchanges. The third file was incomplete, redacted heavily. The final page contained only a handwritten note from a former warden. Silence is not empty. Some minds learn to live inside it. Reyes leaned back, heart pounding. ADX Florence wasn't just containing dangerous men. It was experimenting on them, whether intentionally or not. The next morning, Warden Voss received an encrypted call from the Bureau. They wanted updates. They wanted reassurance. And most importantly, they wanted to know if the inmate was breaking. "He's stable," Voss said carefully. Contained. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Because later that same day, a guard collapsed during patrol. No injury, no illness, just panic. He claimed he heard his own thoughts echoing, louder and louder, until he couldn't tell where they were coming from. He had been assigned to D block for 3 weeks. Reyes recommended immediate rotation changes, psychological evaluations, containment reviews. The Bureau hesitated. ADX Florence existed precisely because hesitation elsewhere had failed. That night, the inmate finally approached the door. He placed his hand flat against the steel. Sensors spiked. Heart rate steady. Breathing controlled. He leaned forward and whispered something so softly it barely registered. Reyes listened to the playback 3 times before the meaning sank in. "You built this place to erase voices," the inmate said. But you forgot to ask what happens when one learns to listen. Reyes closed the file. Outside, the wind howled across the Colorado plains, unheard within the walls of the prison. Inside, ADX Florence remained silent. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt crowded. And somewhere deep within the system, the question no one wanted to answer pressed harder than ever. If isolation could reshape the mind, what kind of mind was ADX Florence creating? And was it still under control? The silence answers back. The lockdown came without announcement. No alarms, no flashing lights, just the quiet click of systems shifting into a deeper mode than most staff had ever seen. Doors sealed. Corridors froze. ADX Florence folded inward like a clenched fist. Warden Evelyn Voss stood alone in the command room, watching a wall of monitors display the same image from a dozen angles. Dr. Samuel Reyes arrived breathless, his badge scanned through layers of clearance that had not existed a week earlier. "The bureau's here," he said. "They're taking over." Voss didn't turn. They already did. A man in a dark suit entered, the kind of official who never introduced himself because his authority spoke first. He nodded once at the screens. "We need a determination," he said. "Is the subject compromised?" Reyes hesitated. He had learned that the wrong word, spoken at the wrong moment, could redirect the fate of an entire institution. "He's changed," he said carefully, "but not in a way our metrics define as unstable." The official's eyes narrowed. "Define changed." "He's synchronized," Reyes said, "with the environment. With us." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. "Then we accelerate," the official said. "Phase red." Voss turned. "Phase red has never been authorized in a live environment. It is now." Within minutes, the prison began to reconfigure itself. Light cycles shortened. Meal intervals randomized. Guard rotations scrambled. White noise introduced into walls at frequencies designed to disrupt cognition. The place ADX Florence had been designed to be, predictable, quiet, absolute, became deliberately chaotic. The inmate noticed immediately. He stood. For the first time since his arrival, he stood for longer than protocol allowed. He approached the door, not aggressively, not urgently, but with purpose. He rested his forehead against the steel and laughed. The sound didn't carry. It wasn't loud enough, but it echoed in the minds of those watching, like a memory they couldn't place. Reyes felt it first, a pressure behind the eyes, a sensation like standing too close to a speaker, except there was no sound, just awareness. Too much of it. "He's enjoying this," Reyes whispered. The official tapped his tablet. "Initiate sensory override." Deep within the facility, systems activated that had never been used together. The white noise intensified. Lights pulsed irregularly. Even the air circulation shifted patterns. The inmate closed his eyes. Then he began to speak. Not to the guards. Not to the cameras. To the prison. "I told you," he said calmly. "You can't drown silence. You can only rearrange it." The first failure registered in the audio logs. Not a blackout. A loop. Microphones began replaying fractions of past recordings. Footsteps. Breaths. Door hinges. Out of sequence. Engineers scrambled to isolate the fault. Then came the lights. Corridors flickered, not randomly, but rhythmically. A pattern too consistent to dismiss. Reyes recognized it instantly. It was a pulse. A heartbeat. "This isn't possible," the official said, his composure cracking. "He's contained." "Physically," Reyes said. "Yes." The inmate opened his eyes. "Do you know why silence works here?" he asked softly. His voice carried cleanly through the system now, as if the prison itself had decided to listen. "Because men bring noise with them. Guilt, rage, fear. You strip it away, and most collapse." He stepped back from the door. "But some of us," he continued, "we find what's underneath." Voss felt the weight of the truth settle into her bones. ADX Florence hadn't broken him. It had refined him. The official ordered his removal. "Prepare extraction," he snapped. "Transfer him out." No one moved. Guards stared at their consoles. Commands lagged. Doors failed to acknowledge inputs. The prison was no longer responding the way it should. Reyes checked the diagnostics. "The systems aren't failing," he said slowly. "They're prioritizing." The inmate smiled. "I learned your rhythms," he said. "Your delays. Your redundancies. You built this place to erase individuality. To make everything the same." He tilted his head. "You forgot that systems hate sameness. They seek efficiency." The realization hit Reyes like a physical blow. ADX Florence had been designed to eliminate variables. The inmate had become one anyway. And now, the system was optimizing around him. "Stop him," the official shouted. "Do something." Voss raised her hand. "Enough," she said. The room fell silent. Not the engineered kind, but the real thing. The kind that followed a choice. She keyed her mic, overriding the automated controls. "D17, she said. "What do you want?" The inmate looked directly into the camera. "Nothing," he replied. "I already have it." The system stabilized. Lights normalized. White noise faded. Doors unlocked, one by one, cautiously, like a creature easing out of fear. The prison exhaled. The bureau official stared at Voss. "You just let him win." "No," she said quietly. "I let us survive." The inmate returned to the center of his cell. Saturday. Closed his eyes. Containment resumed. Official reports later described the incident as a systems anomaly resolved through protocol recalibration. Staff rotations were adjusted. Files were sealed. The inmate remained where he was, classified as stable, monitored more closely than any other human being in federal custody. But ADX Florence was no longer the same. Guards reported a lingering awareness, as if the walls were listening back. Inmates felt quieter than ever, some comforted, others terrified. Silence felt heavier now, not empty, but occupied. Reyes resigned 3 months later. He never gave an interview. In his final report, he wrote only one line: "Isolation doesn't break the mind. It reveals what it's capable of becoming." Years passed. No escapes. No riots. No further incidents. Then, one winter morning, a guard found something unusual etched faintly into the concrete of cell D17. Not words. Not symbols. A pattern. The same pulse Reyes had seen in the lights. The inmate was still there. Still silent. Still contained. But the prison had learned something from him. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled across the Colorado plains and the world outside fell quiet, ADX Florence seemed to breathe in rhythm, listening, remembering. They built it to silence the worst minds on earth. They never considered what might happen if one of them learned to speak without sound. And if this story stayed with you longer than expected, just remember, there are more like it waiting. Hit subscribe, and don't miss what the silence tells next.